Oh, wow. Yeah, and I was asked to do this. And, I was encouraged by a friend who told me it would only last 6 months. She was the glamorous redhead that millions of fans could never forget. Ginger Grant, the movie star, stranded on a tropical island, became one of the most iconic characters in television history. But while Gilligan's Island went on to become a beloved classic, Tina Louise, the woman behind the glitter, quietly walked away. She never returned for the reunion specials. She rarely spoke about the show. And whenever the cast came back together, she was nowhere to be found. For decades, fans have wondered, why? What happened that made Tina Louise turn her back on the role that defined her? At first, the answer seemed simple. Some thought it was ego. Others blamed artistic differences. But the truth is far more complicated and painful. Because behind the scenes of this light-hearted comedy was a storm of resentment, disappointment, and personal sacrifice. Tina Louise was not just stepping away from a role, she was protecting herself from a machine that nearly crushed her. Gilligan's Island aired for only 3 seasons, yet its impact echoed for decades. Reruns made the characters eternal. The theme song became part of pop culture. But for the cast, especially Tina, that fame came with a cost. And while most of her co-stars embraced the legacy, she never did. Her silence spoke volumes until she finally began to open up in rare interviews that revealed just how deep the wounds really went. So what drove the actress behind Ginger Grant to cut ties so completely? What happened on set, and after that made her swear off a reunion with her former castmates? The answer reveals a harsh truth about the price of fame, the trap of typecasting, and the emotional toll of being a woman in Hollywood during its most unforgiving era. And what happened to the rest of the cast only adds more weight to her decision. Long before she ever stepped onto that fictional island, Tina Louise had a very different vision for her career. Born in New York City, she was raised by her mother, a fashion model and a teacher, who introduced her to the world of arts and performance at an early age. Tina studied acting, singing, and dancing, and her earliest ambitions leaned heavily toward serious stage work and dramatic film roles. By the late 1950s, she had already made a name for herself, not as a sitcom star, but as a rising talent in legitimate cinema. One of her breakout performances came in the 1958 film God's Little Acre, where she played a sultry, troubled woman in a dark Southern drama. The role earned her attention from critics and audiences alike. She was also appearing in Broadway productions and studying with some of the most respected acting coaches in New York. For Tina, acting was not just a job, it was a serious craft. She was not interested in comedy, nor in becoming a television personality. She wanted to be known as a dramatic actress, someone who could take on complex, meaningful roles. So when Gilligan's Island came along, it was not exactly a dream offer. According to Tina, she was led to believe the show would focus more on her character, a glamorous movie star with depth and mystery, rather than being a light-hearted ensemble comedy. Some reports suggest she believed the show would revolve around her character entirely, positioning Ginger as a kind of Marilyn Monroe-type figure, stranded in a strange philosophical story. When the series aired, it quickly became clear that was not the case. The tone was broad comedy, the focus was spread across 7 characters, and while Ginger had her moments, she was often reduced to little more than a glamorous distraction. For Tina, this was not just a creative letdown. It was the beginning of a professional trap. She had taken the role with the hope that it would lead to better opportunities down the line. And it became the thing she could never escape. And while she tried to make peace with the job during filming, what unfolded behind the scenes would only deepen her regrets. From the outside, Gilligan's Island looked like paradise. Palm trees, coconuts, laughter, and light-hearted adventures. But behind the scenes, the atmosphere was far from carefree. While most of the cast developed strong friendships over the course of the show's 3-season run, Tina Louise always seemed to stand apart. It was not just the role she played. It was the way she carried herself on set and the way others responded to her. Multiple sources over the years have described Tina as distant during filming. She was professional, but she rarely socialized with her castmates. While actors like Bob Denver, Alan Hale Jr., and Don Wells became like family, Tina kept to herself. Some chalked it up to her being more serious about the craft, while others felt she simply did not want to be there. In later interviews, Don Wells admitted that Tina often disagreed with the direction of the show and felt her character was being underused. Ginger, after all, had started as a character full of promise, a glamorous movie star stranded on an island, full of potential for interesting storylines. But week after week, Tina saw her screen time focused more on flirtation and punchlines than character development. Tensions began to build. Tina reportedly had several clashes with producers over her character's portrayal and the types of jokes she was expected to deliver. She wanted Ginger to be more than just a beautiful face, but the scripts rarely allowed for that. According to cast members and crew, Tina was especially frustrated that Mary Ann, played by Don Wells, began to receive more fan mail and more focus from viewers. The girl next door was winning over America, while Ginger, with all her glamour, was seen as less relatable. That shift in popularity only made the atmosphere more uncomfortable. Still, the show went on. Tina fulfilled her contract and continued to show up to work, even as her dissatisfaction grew. The emotional distance between her and the rest of the cast never fully healed. In interviews years later, other cast members were careful not to speak ill of her, but they often made it clear that Tina was simply not part of their inner circle. She was the outsider, both on the island and off it. And when the show ended, that distance only grew wider. Because while most of the cast embraced the opportunity to reunite and celebrate the show's legacy, Tina Louise made a very different choice. When Gilligan's Island was canceled in 1967, it quietly faded from the airwaves, but only for a short time. Thanks to reruns, the show found an entirely new life in syndication. A younger generation of viewers discovered it, and before long, it became one of the most beloved rerun staples on television. As the nostalgia wave built momentum in the 1970s, it was only natural that the original cast would be asked to reunite, and most of them said yes, with one glaring exception. Tina Louise refused. In 1978, CBS released Rescue from Gilligan's Island, a made-for-TV movie that brought back almost every original cast member. It was a major event, drawing strong ratings and reminding fans why they had loved the show in the first place. But Tina Louise was nowhere to be found. Her iconic role of Ginger was recast, this time played by Judith Baldwin. The move shocked fans, and it was not the last time it would happen. 2 more reunion specials followed: The Castaways on Gilligan's Island in 1979 and The Harlem Globetrotters on Gilligan's Island in 1981. Again, Tina was offered the chance to return. Again, she said no. The same recasting occurred, and each time the absence of the original Ginger felt more and more significant. The other cast members were gracious in interviews, but it was clear that her continued refusal stung. Tina gave a few public reasons for staying away. She claimed she wanted to distance herself from the show and move on to new projects. She said she did not want to be typecast any further and saw the reunions as a step backward. But there was more to it than that. Years later, Don Wells hinted that Tina had lingering resentments about how she was treated during the original run. Bob Denver also suggested that Tina had never really felt connected to the rest of the group, and that feeling, apparently, had not changed with time. And perhaps most telling of all, Tina never watched the reunion specials. In interviews, she admitted that she had not seen them and had no plans to. Her refusal to participate was not just a career choice, it was deeply personal. It was a firm line in the sand, one she never crossed. Tina was not the only cast member whose life took a complicated turn after the show ended. For others, the fame of Gilligan's Island came with unexpected consequences, and some of them were far more damaging than the public ever realized. To fans, Gilligan's Island was simple, wholesome entertainment, the kind of show you could watch with your family and laugh without thinking twice. But for the actors who brought those characters to life, the legacy of the show was anything but lighthearted. The series may have made them famous, but it also locked many of them into roles they could never quite escape. And for Tina Louise, that sense of being trapped was one of the deepest wounds of all. After the show ended in 1967, Tina tried to shift back into the world of serious acting. She took roles in films like The Stepford Wives and guest appearances on dramatic television series. She also returned to the stage, hoping to reclaim the kind of respect she had earned early in her career. But no matter what she did, the image of Ginger Grant followed her. Casting directors saw her as the glamorous sitcom actress, not the serious performer she believed herself to be. And that kind of typecasting was not just frustrating. It was career-altering. Tina later admitted that she felt Gilligan's Island had hurt her chances at meaningful work. In one interview, she stated that the show ruined her movie career, and that she was never able to get past the public's perception of her as Ginger. While the series brought her global fame, it also narrowed the kind of opportunities she could pursue. And in an industry as cutthroat as Hollywood, that kind of reputation could be a death sentence for artistic growth. She was not alone in this struggle. Bob Denver, who played the lovable and clumsy Gilligan, faced similar challenges. After the show ended, he tried his hand at other roles, including a short-lived series called Dusty's Trail. But he was never able to fully break away from the Gilligan persona. Even as fans adored him, producers seemed unable to see him as anything else. And as the years wore on, those limited roles became harder and harder to come by. Other cast members faced the same fate. Russell Johnson, who played the professor, and Dawn Wells, who portrayed Mary Ann, both publicly acknowledged that they had been typecast. They loved the show and their fans, but they also knew the downside of being part of something so iconic. It gave them recognition, but also restricted their growth as actors. For Tina, the sting was even sharper. She had never embraced the show the way some of her co-stars did. And so, instead of leaning into the nostalgia and joining the reunions, she chose to distance herself completely. But the emotional fallout from Gilligan's Island extended beyond typecasting. For Bob Denver, the shadow of fame led to a much darker chapter in his life, one that would haunt him for years. For millions of viewers, Bob Denver was the heart of Gilligan's Island. His wide-eyed innocence, physical comedy, and endearing clumsiness made Gilligan a television icon. But behind that goofy grin was a man wrestling with the long shadow of fame, a shadow that followed him for the rest of his life. While the world saw a beloved character, Bob often felt trapped in an identity he could not shake. After the show ended, Denver tried to carve out a new path. He starred in other projects, including The Good Guys and Dusty's Trail, but none came close to matching the success of Gilligan's Island. Typecasting followed him everywhere. Casting directors, fans, and even his peers struggled to see him as anyone other than Gilligan. But while he remained gracious in interviews and loyal to his fans, the reality behind the scenes was far more difficult. By the 1990s, Bob's name was often in the headlines, but not for new roles. Reports began surfacing about run-ins with the law and legal troubles tied to substance use. In one widely publicized incident, authorities found an illegal substance in his mailbox, though he later claimed it had been sent by a fan without his knowledge. While the charges were eventually dropped, The incident added to a pattern that hinted at deeper struggles. For someone who had once been one of America's favorite comedic stars, the decline was hard to watch. Despite those setbacks, Bob remained active in public life. He did interviews, appeared at fan conventions, and stayed in touch with former castmates, especially Dawn Wells, with whom he shared a close bond. But privately, he seemed weighed down by the legacy of Gilligan. The fame that had once lifted him to stardom became a burden he could never fully put down. It defined him, and it limited him. To many fans, Bob Denver's later years felt like a cautionary tale. Fame, especially the kind born from a single powerful role, can be a double-edged sword. It gives you the world's attention, and then quietly robs you of the chance to become anything else. And while he never publicly lashed out at the show that made him famous, it was clear that it had shaped, and in many ways, restricted, the rest of his life. Tina Louise saw all of this happening from afar. She saw the way her co-stars struggled to escape their roles, the way the industry refused to let them grow, and the way the weight of nostalgia could quietly erode a person's identity. For Tina, walking away from Gilligan's Island was not just about personal pride. It was an act of survival. But after decades of silence, she finally began to open up. And when she did, what she shared gave fans an entirely new understanding of why she stayed away for so long. For decades, Tina Louise remained one of the great mysteries of classic television. While the rest of the Gilligan's Island cast made peace with their shared legacy, appearing at fan events, reunion interviews, and nostalgic tributes, Tina stayed quiet. Her name was still spoken with reverence by fans, but her voice was noticeably absent. That silence fueled endless speculation. Was she angry, embarrassed, or simply uninterested? The truth, it turns out, was more nuanced and more human. In the early 2000s, Tina began to grant a handful of interviews where, for the first time, she addressed her decision to walk away from Gilligan's Island. She was calm, thoughtful, and, to the surprise of many, not bitter at all. She spoke kindly about her castmates, especially Alan Hale Jr. and Jim Backus, calling them wonderful people and true professionals. She even praised Bob Denver's comedic timing, but when it came to her own experience, she made it clear. The show simply was not the right fit for who she was or the kind of career she had hoped to build. Tina revealed that she had never hated the show. She hated being reduced to a caricature. To her, Ginger was written too narrowly, portrayed more as a punchline than a person. As someone who trained in serious theater and had taken on complex roles in film, Tina struggled with the flatness of her television character. It was not about ego, it was about creative fulfillment. And after the series ended, every casting call, every headline, every fan interaction seemed to pull her back into that same glittering box. In her words, participating in reunion specials would have meant reliving a role she had fought hard to move past. It was not a rejection of the fans, or even of her fellow cast members. It was a personal boundary. By staying away, she was preserving her own sense of identity, one that had already been stretched thin by the expectations of Hollywood. Over time, some fans came to admire her for that. In an industry that often demands total surrender, Tina chose to protect herself. She continued acting in select roles, published books, and remained involved in the arts, but always on her terms. And in recent years, as nostalgia for classic television continues to grow, even her harshest critics have come to see her choice not as arrogance, but as a kind of quiet defiance. Still, her story raises a lingering question. How should we remember Tina Louise as the glamorous Ginger forever stranded on that fictional island, or as the fiercely independent actress who walked away from it all? Today, Tina Louise stands as the last surviving cast member of Gilligan's Island, the final living link to a show that shaped generations of television. And yet, Her place in that legacy remains one of quiet complexity. While the rest of the cast embraced the nostalgia, Tina chose a different path. She did not return for reunion movies. She skipped public celebrations, and she rarely commented on her time as Ginger Grant. To some fans, that decision felt cold, but to others, it was a powerful act of self-preservation. The truth is, Tina Louise never set out to become a television icon. She wanted to be an actress, a serious one, and she worked hard to build that future. But one role, as glamorous and beloved as it was, pulled her off that path. And once the public latched onto Ginger, they never let go. Every offer she received, every comment from strangers, every expectation from the industry kept circling back to that one character. For Tina, it must have felt like the island was not just fictional. It was real, and she was trapped on it, long after the cameras stopped rolling. Her decision to walk away was not about rejecting fans or denying the show's place in history. It was about reclaiming her identity. She understood, perhaps better than anyone, that fame can be a gilded cage, that being adored is not the same as being understood, and that sometimes the boldest thing an artist can do is say no. Looking back, the legacy of Gilligan's Island is a complicated one. It brought joy to millions. It created unforgettable characters. But it also boxed in the very people who gave it life. Bob Denver never escaped Gilligan. Dawn Wells wrestled with Marianne's shadow. And Tina Louise? She refused to be remembered for something that made her feel small. In the end, maybe that is what makes her story so compelling. She was not just the movie star on the island. She was the one who swam away, quietly, deliberately, and on her own terms. And perhaps that is the real reason Tina Louise never came back. Because she knew the price of fame better than most, and chose herself instead.